Hi, everyone. We are going to get the webinar started. We have folks joining us and logging on, so I will start with a brief introduction, but we are so excited that all of you are going to spend the next hour with us, and hopefully learning a lot on how to talk to your kids about drugs and alcohol. My name is Erin Teggy. I work at Peer Services, and I'm the Prevention Project Manager. I've been working in substance use prevention and treatment for about the past 7 years, and I've been working very closely with GNCY, Glenview Northbrook Coalition for Youth, for majority of those years as well. And I'm really excited to bring this topic to the community. I will say in the work of the coalition, the work that I've been doing with the high school, Glenbrook North, Glenbrook South, District 34, etc. One of the things that we regularly hear from parents is they're not sure how to have these conversations. So we're really excited to bring this topic to you guys. And hopefully, like I said, you will learn a few tips and tricks to help you have these conversations with your own kids. So just really briefly, a little bit about Glenview Northbrook Coalition for Youth. So we are a local drug-free communities coalition, and our goal really is to help the youth in Glenview and Northbrook live those safe drug and alcohol-free lives. We work with many different community partners, the park districts, the libraries, the schools, different religious organizations, parents organizations, youth, parents, etc., to really help our kids make those good decisions. So a couple housekeeping things regarding the webinar. Is that this will be recorded. We will make sure that you guys get the link for that recording. You will receive an email from Zoom later this week with that information. So you will definitely have access to that recording. If you have questions that come up throughout, please use the Q&A function in the bottom panel, and we will kind of collect those, review those, and have some time at the end of the presentation to hopefully address those questions. If we are unable to get to some of those questions, we can make sure we send an email and follow up if we aren't able to get to everything. We are also sharing all of the handouts and presentation materials from today's webinar. Including a link right now in the chat box to a Google Drive folder where you can access everything. We will also send all of the materials and handouts in that follow-up email as well. And then also at the end, we do ask that you fill out a really short survey. It's only 8 questions. We'll also send it in an email, just to know how we're doing and what other topics that we you guys would like to hear us talk about. So with that, we are going to move into some content. So the agenda for today, we are going to first briefly talk about kind of what prevention is at varying ages. We're going to talk a little bit about decision making and how you as parents or guardians or whatever role you have in the teen's life, how you can support them, the impact of parental approval or disapproval of substance use, and then really getting into kind of the meat of everything, how to send that clear no use message and how to have these conversations. Then we're going to work through some scenarios to kind of practice thinking through how we might respond to certain situations. And then one of the things we regularly hear from parents is this topic can be really intimidating because what if their teen asks them a question they don't know how to respond to, or different situations? And so we're going to address some of those towards the end. And then we have a number of resources for everyone, because I'm sure you are not going to be able to remember everything from this webinar. And 6 months from now, you might need something. So we definitely have a lot of resources for you. So I'm going to start things off with a little poll just to kind of gauge where you all are at regarding this topic. So the first question that I want to ask is how comfortable you are talking about drugs and alcohol with your kids. So I launched the poll, so feel free to vote, kind of gauge where you are, and we'll see how folks feel about this topic. All right, we have a couple more seconds in case there's any others who want to answer. All right, so, definitely all across the board, some very comfortable with this topic, some very uncomfortable, and everywhere in between, and that is okay. So one more question before we jump into things, just to help you think about kind of how often you're having these conversations with your kids, and kind of gauge where you all are at with the frequency of this topic and talking with your kids. So feel free to vote. All right. This too, every few months seems to be majority, but varying frequencies with that. So yeah, so thank you for doing that. We will have a few more polls a little bit later. So when we're thinking about this topic, I have this slide also at the end of my presentation. It's kind of the summary of this presentation and what I really want you all to get out of this. The first is whether or not you've ever had these conversations, whether you have them every day or every week or every month, definitely have a conversation today. Start talking now. If it's not something that you regularly do, definitely start talking about it. And really the ultimate goal of these conversations is that we really want you to create this environment that your kids will feel comfortable coming to you in any situation. Even if it has nothing to do with substance use or drugs or alcohol, we want to make sure that us as parents, I'm a parent too, that we are creating an open, honest relationship with our kids so that whatever situation they find themselves in, they can come to you about it and talk to you about it. And that really ultimately is the goal. And also, having resources and know where you or your child can go if they need help or if they have questions. There's tons and tons to learn about substances. This is my job and I'm always learning about what the latest trends are and the health aspects, and so we, like I said, we want to make sure you have those resources available to you and your teens or kids. So when we're talking about prevention, by definition, it is the act of stopping something from happening. And in those of us who are in the substance use field, when we think about substance use prevention with our youth, what we're really looking at is to delay or eliminate the onset of use. So there's likely certain substances that we never want our kids to engage in use. But there's also some substances out there like alcohol where it may be, once they are of legal age, once their brain has stopped developing, then, they may engage in use. And so when we're thinking about these conversations with our kids and kind of the prevention side of things, we're really arming our kids with the information to either delay or eliminate that onset of use. So a lot of times parents ask me, like, when am I supposed to start having these conversations? In my opinion, it can be very, very young. The conversation is going to look very different with a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old as it would with a 9-year-old or 13-year-old or 19-year-old. But you really can have these conversations at very young ages, starting in preschool. So with those 3 and 4-year-olds, we find that situations like taking medicine is a perfect opportunity to start talking about, substances and how to appropriately take, Tylenol or prescription medication. Typically, your conversation and statements are going to be very short because cognitively and developmentally, a 3 and 4-year-old can only handle so much information. Real quick story. So my oldest, she is 7, but when she was about 4 years old, I had a situation with her. I had a glass of wine and she was asking, what is that? She was just curious and asking questions. And so, I was able to share, oh, this is wine. It has alcohol in it. It is only for adults. And she was like, okay, well, why is that? Luckily, she had just been learning about the brain and the body in school. And one of the things she had learned, I thank her teacher every day for this, back then, is she learned that her brain is the boss of her body. And so because I knew she had kind of that language, I was able to use that when talking about alcohol. So I was able to share with her, it was like, alcohol is only for adults because if kids use alcohol, it can make the brain not work right. And then your brain isn't going to be able to be the boss of your body. And then your body's not going to know what to do. And so I was able to, use that information and language that she already had when talking about these substances. So then, as our kids are getting older, we're able to have kind of deeper conversations with them about substance use. So in that elementary school age, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, you're really going to be able to get into why substances are harmful for kids, getting much more details. They learn so much in school about their developing brain that you're able to use all of that information and really get into some of the more technical side of things as to why substances can be risky or harmful for kids. Those discussions definitely continue. In middle school, get deeper, you're able to bring in kind of some of those social situations, peer pressure, et cetera, to really kind of expand on some of that knowledge that they already have. And definitely by middle school, they're learning about this in school. So being able to kind of reinforce what they're learning at school, at home, is really, really useful. Then definitely in high school, again, even more detailed conversations and really thinking through very specific situations, especially those social situations. Because by high school, whether they're freshmen, seniors, whatever, they will likely be exposed to substances in some way. And so really being able to talk about those situations and have really clear conversations about it. One of the things that we'll talk to it about in a little bit is how important it is to be clear. That we say so often, we just send that clear no use message, because those high schoolers don't do well with vague language. And we will talk about that. And then these conversations continue even after you no longer have a high schooler. So maybe you have a young adult, a college age student, etc. And those conversations continue. Just because they might not live at home with you anymore doesn't mean you just can't talk about this. Those 18 to 20-year-olds still are underage, and it is not legal for them to engage in youth. So having those conversations still, even though they're likely exposed to it more. And then 21 and older, your job as a parent doesn't stop there, and helping them understand how to be responsible and if they choose to use in their substance use, and how to stay safe, etc. So thinking through the impact that you have. So in this section, we're really going to prove to you that what you say matters, and you actually have a really great impact on your kids with this particular topic. And then we're going to get into that conversation piece. I wish I had an actual script to give you, but I have lots of options for you to have these conversations. And then, like I said, we'll get to those hard questions. So this particular slide, probably one of my favorite things that I like to share with parents, because it proves that you absolutely can impact what your kids do. So this data, and I promise this is the only data that I have today. This comes from Glenbrook North and Glenbrook South high school students. They participate in a survey every 2 years called the Illinois Youth Survey, which asks questions about substance use behaviors and attitudes. And so one of the questions that the survey asks is, how wrong do you think your parents feel it would be for you to use alcohol or marijuana or smoke cigarettes, misuse prescription drugs, etc. And what we do is we look at the responses of the students on that question, and then we compare it and look at it as it relates to their 30-day substance use. So when we are looking at data and kind of how we gauge what use looks like in our community, we look at that 30-day use. So have you engaged in alcohol use in the past 30 days? And so what this graph shows is, and we'll look at alcohol for example's sake, when there are students who think that their parents strongly disapprove of alcohol use, they are significantly less likely to actually engage in alcohol use than one of their peers who thinks that their parent approves of use. So we can see the difference. Students who think their parents strongly disapprove, only 24% of them engaged in alcohol use over the past 30 days, versus on the other spectrum, 84% of kids who think that their parents strongly approve of use, 84% of them engaged in alcohol use over the past 30 days. And I work in a number of different communities, and we have this data for the different communities. And it always looks the same, no matter what community I'm in. It is very consistent data, but I think it really does show the impact that you as a parent have on your kids, especially with this topic. You know, I mean, myself as a parent, and I've heard from plenty of other parents, you know, sometimes you feel like your kids aren't listening to you, or what you say doesn't necessarily matter. This data proves it does. And this, like I said, this is from our Glenbrook North and Glenbrook South high school students. So this is all of our local kids. So hopefully that, you know, helps prove the importance of what you have to say to your kids about this. So just some things as you're, you know, kind of planning on having these conversations with your teen, things to keep in mind. At the end of the day, this is about their health and well-being. It's not about what's right and wrong. It's not about good, bad. It's not about rules and consequences. Really, ultimately, our goal is to really support our kids in their health and well-being. And we really want to make sure as we have these conversations that we're coming from a place of love and concern. Conversations that are, you know, full of anger or lecturing do not always go so well. So making sure as we're having these conversations, it really does have that, you know, place of love and concern. Definitely trying to keep a cool head. These topics can get heated. They can be difficult to talk about. And so making sure you're, you know, in those moments, having self-care and making sure that you're staying calm. And if you need to take a break because the conversation isn't going well, that's totally fine. It's going to be much more productive if everyone's staying calm and cool and collected versus, you know, things escalating. Definitely being direct. And we will absolutely keep talking about this throughout the rest of the presentation, but making sure you're being very, very clear on your expectations for your teens. Letting them know, you know, very specifically asking about the substances. Is there going to be a substance at a party? Is there going to be this? You know, I do not want, you know, I would like you not to engage in use because X, Y, and Z. So just being really, really clear and not kind of beating around the bush, because that does not always get the message across. The next one I think is really important is withholding judgment. So this past spring, we had the opportunity to work with a group of GBN and GBS students over the spring for a number of weeks to work on some prevention initiatives within the high schools. And one of the things that kept coming up over and over and over from the students was this aspect of judgment, and how when talking about substance use, mental health, etc., being non-judgmental was so important, and came up so many different times in our conversation. So I wanted to make sure to stress that piece of being non-judgmental when we're talking about this. And then also being aware of your nonverbal cues. So paying attention to your tone of voice, your body posture, facial expressions, etc. Because, we want to make sure as we're talking about this, that verbal communication, what we're saying, is matched by our nonverbal communication. We don't want to take away from the message that we're trying to say if those nonverbal cues are not matching what we're trying to say. Some other things to keep in mind, and I will go much more into detail about this next one a little bit, and I do say this with a caveat about talking about your own memories and mistakes. So this particular one is going to be very, very individual to your experience as well as your kids' experience. You may have 3 kids and you may not approach each kid the same, specifically with this one. And so it's really talking about your own memories as it relates and your own experiences as it relates to substance use is going to be very individual. One of the things I think that should be much more universal, if your family has a history of substance use, then that is absolutely something you should talk about, just because kids are at higher risk of substance use disorders if there is a family history. And so that absolutely is something that is important to talk about. But when it comes to other things, you may or may not choose to talk about those things. The next one, have a plan. And talking through specific situations. So in one of the handouts that we have provided for you, it's called the X Plan. So as part of the conversations with your kids, it's really, really great to have a code word or code phrase or something that you and your kids have to help them out of a situation. Because maybe they went over to a friend's house and they ended up finding them in a situation that they didn't know was going to happen. They are uncomfortable. It can be related to substance use or not, and they need a way out. And so it is so helpful for you as a parent to kind of talk with them ahead of time. The code word could be, they want ice cream, or they have to walk the dog, or, make sure you have a dog if that's your code. Something, whatever the case may be, so that they can just text you whatever that code is, and you immediately know that they need help and they want to get out of that situation. No questions asked. And that part is really important. No questions asked. You get them, you make sure they're safe, you get them home. That is not the time to lecture, or, if they're open to talking about it and discussing, great. If not, just let them be and thank them for coming to you with that. And so talking through those specific situations, and almost practicing, you don't necessarily have to role play. You can if you want, but talking through specific situations so that when they are faced with those situations, they kind of already know how to respond, whether that's peer pressure, or whatever the case may be. If someone asks them if they want an e-cigarette or asks them if they want a drink, talking through those situations is so helpful so that they can practice, so that the first time that they might experience that, they've already thought through it and know how to respond. And then the last one to kind of keep in mind as you're kind of planning for these conversations is thinking about your own relationship with substance use. I'm not going to tell you, you guys are all adults. Whatever you do, but I want you to think about your relationship with substance use and kind of what message that sends your kids. If you're going out for dinner as a family, and if both you and your spouse have a beer or a glass of wine at dinner, are you talking about who's driving home? Are you having those conversations in front of your kids? Are they seeing you as adults being responsible about your use? One of the things over the past 15 months with COVID, alcohol use among adults soared. significantly higher usage rates, alcohol sales, etc., during the pandemic. And I think, what research has shown is that, a lot of folks were using it to cope with stress and all of that. And so, at the end of the day, are you getting home from the office or just whatever? And are you pouring yourself a glass of wine or having a beer or bourbon, whatever? And are you saying, oh my gosh, I'm so stressed, I just need to drink? Well, that may be true. Thinking about what message that sends your kid, that's sending, oh, when I'm stressed, I can turn to substances to handle my stress. And so just, again, not going to tell you what you should do as an adult, but just think about how your behaviors and what those are and what messages they could be sending to the kids in your house or the kids in your life. Things to kind of think about not doing. Try not to get defensive. The conversation might not go great, and your team might feel like you're attacking them or whatever. Use that as a discussion point. Talk about why they're feeling that way. Talk, and kind of talk about that. But try not to get defensive and try not to take it personally. Just like you should be aware of your nonverbal communication, you should definitely be aware of their nonverbal communication and not necessarily take what they say at face value as end all be all. So paying attention to their tone of voice and their facial expressions and their body language to make sure their nonverbal cues are matching what they're trying to say. And definitely try not to be distracted when you're having these conversations. Your team wants to feel heard and listened to. And so making sure you're not on your phone and not texting and not, not working, not have your laptop open, etc. Try and, be attentive for your kids. So kind of the crux of all of this and kind of the basis of what we're really trying to help our teens do is ultimately decision making. So we really want to influence their decision making as it relates to substance use, because ultimately it is their choice. They are the ones who are in that situation and choosing to engage in substance use or not. Yes, we want to make sure that they're not, but ultimately it is that decision making. And so having decision making be a part of your conversation is really important. And, when people are making decisions, it really is based on their experiences, their memories, what they have learned. And so as it relates to substance use, we want to make sure that they're learning accurate and current information. If you're not talking about substance use, yes, they might learn about it at school, but then they might also learn about it from their friends or from TikTok or from the internet or from whatever shows on Netflix and Hulu they're watching. And so as we're thinking about their decision making, we want to make sure that we're providing them with information and learning experiences so that they can make an informed decision. And I just put up one of kind of the normal decision-making models that we tend to use. This is a fairly common one. We use this a lot with our middle schoolers when we work with them. So if you wanted to go really in depth about decision-making with your kid, this is an example that when they're making decisions, we first want them to stop and then think about what the situation is, evaluate their choices, figure out, different outcomes, act on that choice, and then reflect. And so you as a parent, as it relates to substance use, by having these conversations and letting your kids know very clearly how you feel about them engaging in use or not engaging in use, it's going to impact them at that stop portion. You being in their head, telling them you don't want them to do this is going to help them, first stop and then kind of move forward with their decision. And you're definitely going to be providing them information and education so that they're thinking about like, okay, if I use an e-cigarette, then it might harm my lungs. If I don't use an e-cigarette, then my lungs are going to be healthy, so helping them with that process. And obviously they're the ones who are acting on that decision. And then would be also great to be a part of that reflection process. If they had a situation where they were pressured to do something and they shared that with you, for you to be a part of that reflection to kind of go over how that went for them. So that's just one example in that decision-making process. So how do we actually send a clear no use message? I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what this actually means. Whenever we have new staff or interns or new coalition members who aren't really familiar with prevention, and we start talking about, sending a clear no use message, a lot of times people think it is the don't do drugs, just say no, and that's it, period. 3 words and we're done. It is absolutely not that. It's not, the car crash on the high school lawn before prom. It is not simply just saying no. If it were that easy, that would be great, but it is absolutely not that easy. And what these messages tend to do is they tend to be very emotionally charged. They tend to be one-sided, and they really don't provide opportunity for discussion or really decision-making for your teen, kid, etc. These are very, very one-sided and really don't open up the opportunity to talk about it. So really, how I view sending a clear no use message, it really is a conversation about how drugs and alcohol impact their health, their goals, their future. And so this is going to look very different between kids. So one of the things in this particular slide comes from an athletic director in a neighboring community. This is like his favorite thing to talk about, is how teens are interpreting our messages. So if we're not sending a clear no use message, and let's say we just say, oh, have fun at so-and-so's house, be smart. You might be thinking, be smart, don't do drugs, or be smart, take care of your body and don't engage in substance use, whatever the case may be. But your teen may interpret that message very differently, because teens are not very good in the abstract or vague. They may interpret it as don't get caught, or they may interpret it as, oh, I'm gonna have a designated driver, or I'm gonna, sleep over at so-and-so's house so that we don't go anywhere after we've been drinking. And so while, I think, we've probably all been guilty of sending messages like this, making sure that we're clear so that our message doesn't get misinterpreted by our teen or our kid, because we want to make sure that they 100% know exactly where we stand on this issue or other important issues. So when we send a clear no use message, we want to make sure we're establishing those expectations early. That's why we can start talking about drugs and alcohol in preschool. And it's having conversations year round, not just at specific times. I think especially in high school, it's very common, right before homecoming, right before spring break, right before prom, graduation, kind of those big events in a high schooler's life where there is an increased likelihood of substance use to be happening. I think it's easy just to talk about it at those specific times, but not year round. In the prevention world, in the substance use world, those of us, we kind of have this saying, it is not just one 60-minute conversation, because that sounds very intimidating and probably not enjoyable for both parent and child, but it is 61-minute conversations. We want to take this topic and infuse it in all aspects of life, whether you're sitting at the dinner table or you hear something on the news or you're in the car, just really short snippets and really short conversations to get your message across. It doesn't have to be this giant big thing where you sit down and say, okay, we're going to talk about this today. It can just happen naturally. Also, part of sending a clear no use message is being super direct with clear consequences that explain why. One of the things that I have found working with high school students and middle schoolers too is needing to understand why. And really being able to use facts and consequences that are meaningful and resonate with your child. This blue box on the left we do ask high school students and a number of the communities that I work with why they choose not to use. And I think this information is super important when having these conversations and knowing why your teen chooses not to use. Hands down, I think no matter what community I'm in, the highest, most important number one reason why teens choose not to use is so that they can be in control of their body and actions. That's always number one. And then it's very, varies for these other ones. But asking your child and having that conversation with your child why they personally choose not to use. Maybe they're in choir and they really need their lung capacity to sing. And so using e-cigarettes or smoking cannabis, smoking a joint is going to harm the health of their lungs, and then they're not going to be able to sing as well. So really thinking through what those interests and talents and goals are of your kid and really talking with them about why they choose not to use. And then, continuing to talk about that motivation for them so that they can continue to make, those healthy choices. And again, to kind of reinforce the impact that you guys have, research absolutely shows when you talk with your kids about drugs and alcohol, they're 50% less likely to engage in use, as we showed earlier. So really looking at those facts and kind of the short and long-term impact of substance use and really how it relates with your child, your individual child, which, that's probably going to look very different if you have multiple kids. So yes, what do you say? How do you bring this up? How do you talk about this? Kind of those conversation starters. There are lots of opportunities to talk about substance use and drugs and alcohol in the world. I think one of the things now, especially that Illinois is opened up again, restrictions have been lifted, things are happening, people are gathering, concerts are happening, baseball games are happening, etc. I have heard on the radio, on the news, I have heard people talk about, being able to do things like it's the end of prohibition and that people are just gonna, go out into the streets and be drinking and, partying and, so I think just that is a perfect conversation starter. Lollapalooza is happening at full capacity this summer. And, that is definitely a concert, that a lot of high school students like to go to. Country Thunder is another one that's also happening. There's a lot of things happening this summer that are happening that people are just excited to be out, but then that accessibility piece is also going to be there. So using kind of these upcoming local events to talk about it. Movies, TV shows, music. I just pulled some data about just how frequently alcohol or drugs are referenced in music and in TV or movies. So the Alcohol Center music piece comes from a study at Northwestern, and they looked at the Billboard Top 100 list over, I believe it was from 2007 to 2017. So over the course of 10 years. And this is only for alcohol, not other drugs, but they looked at all the song lyrics. And if alcohol was referenced, then they made note of that. And so you can see here, 38% of hip hop music, makes references to alcohol, 36% of country music, etc. So just listen, whatever music your kids are listening to, listen to those lyrics and hear what's in that and use that. Be like, oh, I heard, this part of the lyric. Do you know what that is? What is that referencing? And kind of use that as a way to talk about it. Or, here on the right, Netflix and Hulu and Prime Video. So this was a study done about, and this is only the original content, so not all the other content that other production companies have put out. This is only for Netflix, Hulu, and Prime Video, but how often drugs and alcohol are referenced in their scripts. So you can see there's definitely, it is out there. And I believe this study was done in 2018. So definitely, the media can absolutely be used to how to bring up this conversation. And then definitely looking at news and current events, just in the past month, in terms of current events, the FDA is looking to ban all flavored tobacco products. So if you see an article or something on the news about that, talk about it. Talk about, oh, why do you think, flavored tobacco products, including flavored e-cigarettes, are such a big deal that the FDA is looking to ban them, and use that as an in. I know just recently the city of Chicago was looking to keep the restrictions on when alcohol sales can be made. So during COVID, it had been an earlier time, and Mayor Lightfoot wants to keep it at an earlier time for a variety of reasons. So talk about that. What does stopping alcohol sales at an earlier time do? What does that say? So really looking at some of those local current events and using that as an opportunity to talk. So now I want to go through a couple scenarios just to see how you guys might respond. There's no wrong answer. These are all anonymous, but these are legit scenarios that I'm sure some of you have found yourself in. And we're going to kind of use these scenarios to keep talking about this. So let me pull up the poll. All right. So you are driving with your teen to the mall and drive past the newly opened dispensary. Your teen comments that the building looks cool and wonders what the building is for. How would you respond? So read the options and think either how you would respond or how you might want to respond, and then we'll talk about it. You have a couple more seconds for people to put their vote in. Okay, so sharing the results. So yeah, most of you, it looks like you'd use it as an opportunity, like, oh, I think that's a dispensary, marijuana dispensary. What do you think about having a dispensary here in the community? As I was writing this scenario, I was very much thinking of the dispensary right across the street from Old Orchard Mall. Because it is a very interesting looking building. And yeah, I know I've driven past the dispensary on Dundee and Skokie Boulevard in Northbrook, and yeah, like it does bring questions to mind. So yeah, the first one, you may legitimately not know what it is, and so you don't know that a conversation should continue. The next one, I wanted to make sure to put this one in there because I think it's so important that if you as a parent don't necessarily know what the answer is, it provides a really great opportunity for you guys, you and your kid, to find it out together, research it, look it up. Then it gives you the opportunity to talk about credible sources of information and all of that stuff. But use it as an opportunity to research it and find it out together. So I think that is a really great option. I'm glad no one said said number 3. You should probably not say this because again, it goes back to that kind of one-sided, non-discussion part, even though that's what you might be thinking. I'm glad that you guys chose other options. And yeah, the last one definitely provides an opportunity for conversation and to hear what your teen has to say. So as we're thinking about what it is that we're talking about, using those open-ended questions in these conversations is so important. When you ask those yes or no questions, or don't even provide questions, you're just lecturing or interrogating. You're not listening and learning what your teen has to say. And so using open-ended questions like these are going to be really useful in kind of moving that conversation along and really hearing, what your teen thinks, feels, and what their experiences are as it relates to this. So these are just some examples of open-ended questions. Yeah, what are you learning about this at school? What are your thoughts? How do I support you? All good things to ask. All right, the next scenario poll. So your teen approaches you to ask about attending a party. They say, there's a party at my classmate's house this Saturday. Everyone's going, and I really want to go. I'm sure many of you have heard this. How would you respond? So think about how you might respond in this situation. I feel like this one might be a little bit more difficult. Be about 10 more seconds, and then we'll go through it. All right, so most of you who responded did that last one, which is great. You know, I think it's really important to kind of validate that social experience of your teen that you want them to experience, you know, have these social opportunities. But you're also communicating that you're going to make sure that the other parents are home and, you know, checking in and supervising, and making sure, you know, that your teen knows that you don't want them to engage in drinking or other drug use. I think the first one is a great option too, because that shows that you've had these conversations before. And this one, I was kind of referring to that X plan, you know, to make sure that they remember, hey, we've talked about this. If, you know, you find yourself in an uncomfortable situation, make sure, you know our plan, you know what to do. Yeah, definitely the second one, kind of that end all be all, one-sided. And then yes, the third one, be sure, that sounds great, but be safe. It's that vague, uncertain message that's there. And so as we're thinking through, kind of going back to that tone and that nonverbal communication. So this particular chart is from a resource from the Partnership to End Addiction. It used to be the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids. And it kind of really gets at thinking about how to communicate in that non-judgmental way. So the left and the right, you're basically saying the exact same thing, but saying in a way that's going to lead to a much more productive conversation. You might want to say what's on the left, but that may not, again, lead to that conversation and that discussion that you are hoping to have with your team. And so the examples on the right, you know, are just slightly different ways of rephrasing, so that it leads to that conversation and gives a little more information as to why your reasoning. It kind of comes back to you caring about their health and well-being, that kind of non-judgmental component. So yes, instead of saying smoking pot is bad for you, smoking pot is harmful for your health and your brain. So yes, it is, you know, the message, like the information might be the same, but it is saying it in definitely a different, more productive way on the right, because it is, you know, kind of sharing it's harmful for your health and your brain. You know, I want to make sure you stay healthy, your brain fully develops, etc. So these are just some examples that you can use for various situations, not just substance related. All right, so the last scenario that I want to go through is one I've definitely heard about. So we'll launch this. So you're cleaning out your car, which your teen regularly drives, and you find an e-cigarette under the seat. You approach your teen and they say, I was holding it for a friend. What do you say? How do you respond? All right, a couple more seconds. All right. So yeah, the last two seem to be the most popular. Yeah, thank you for the honesty of the first one of that, immediate, I don't care. Yes, that definitely is, even, well, with my kids not related to substance use, that definitely goes through my head at times. But yes, that is going to again lead to a very one-sided discussion. So again, hopefully you guys are seeing how we want to open up conversation about this topic. The next one, so it was interesting as I was creating these scenarios and working through the different options. Some of my coworkers were helping me, and this one was so hard to come up with different options. We struggled for a while because I think it's with the bottom two. As we were writing these, we wanted to get past blame and possession and get at how they thought about e-cigarettes. With the second one, I'm glad it's not yours, but should you be hanging around other people who do use e-cigarettes? That's the these are just hard. I'm even having a hard time talking about it because this is a hard situation. Because that friendship piece is so important for kids, and that social component. And so that second one, there is some judgment there. I mean, yes, you as a parent, if it is not your kids, you're obviously very glad it is not their kids, and you should definitely be reinforcing and thanking them for not engaging in use. But I think the last two kind of open up that opportunity for conversation that removes that judgment and really helps them feel that they can talk about it. So but yeah, these are hard, but I know very real situations. So kind of getting to the hard questions and the hard situations, because we're running short on time, I'm going to kind of breeze through some of these, since you do have access to the slides. Yeah, your teen, I know, we've talked about this before, stop talking to me about this, I know. But, just like you have to tell your kids to clean their room 800 times, you can talk about this 800 times. That repetition is so important. And so even though you've talked about it before, absolutely, you're going to talk about it again. And you can say, it is my job as a parent to have these conversations with you. Just doing my job. Your teen says nothing. They look at you blankly. They just stare at you. Absolutely happens. And this is where those open-ended questions come into play. And if they continue to say nothing, then maybe that's just not the right time. And that's okay. This is why we want to make sure we're having these conversations and providing the opportunity for these conversations regularly throughout the month, throughout the weeks, throughout the year, etc. So that if they're not in a place to talk about it that week, you're going to have an opportunity to talk about it next week. And then maybe then they're going to want to talk. So if they're really not going to want to talk about it one day, that's okay. Ask those open-ended questions, see if you can get them to talk. And if not, try again another day. And that's totally fine. This one we hear, oh, marijuana, cannabis is natural. It's just a plant. What's so bad about it? So these are just some examples that you can respond. I have said the first one to students. Yes, not all plants are healthy. Look at poison ivy. You wouldn't want to be doing anything with poison ivy, and that's natural and that's plant, and yet it is harmful. And majority of substances out there are derived from plants or are natural. So yes, just because it's natural, there are absolutely risks associated with it. Another one, and this one definitely, since recreational cannabis has been legal in Illinois, well, now for about a year and a half, this was very, very, very popular right around the beginning of 2020 when that legalization first went into effect. We had many conversations with teens about, oh, well, it's legal now. What? How bad could it be? Well, it's legal only if you're 21. And yes, just looking at, just because it's legal doesn't mean it's safe for you, and kind of talking through that. Next, I only did it once, just try it, it's fine, no big deal. That provides such an amazing opportunity to really talk about their experience. And if they only did it once, you know, why have they chosen not to do it again, and really look in deeper about why they have chosen not to do it again. And again, continue just to kind of have them be able to share their experience and what were the circumstances surrounding that experience. I don't know what to say when other kids ask me to use, really getting at that peer pressure component. And that's why it's so important to talk about some of those social situation and coming up with peer pressure refusal strategies, and helping them work through those so that if they do find themselves in a situation, they know how to respond. Again, that practice is going to help them a lot. So just role playing and coming up with that plan for them. So this one, I do want to spend, I'm very short on time, slightly more time on. Have you ever used, or did you use in high school? And so this one is really going to be so individual for you and for your kids. And it's almost like there's no right answer, because if you did use and you say yes, then they're gonna be like, well, you used and you turned out fine, what's the big deal? If you didn't use in high school or didn't use underage, you know, then it's, oh, you don't understand, you don't, you know, how can you relate to me? How can you give me information because you don't understand because you never did it? And so how we try and think through this question and the responses is really looking at how your response is going to be the most beneficial for your kid. It's not about you. It's not about necessarily your story. It's really about what is going to help your kid make a good choice. You know, I had worked a number of years ago with someone from the Illinois Liquor Control Commission, and he used this example, which I thought was really, really great. You know, he shared how back in the day, you know, kids never wore seatbelts, you know, car seat rules and restrictions were like non-existent, and, you know, it was kind of a free-for-all. Research came about, safety things showed that yes, kids should be rear facing till they're 2, you know, other car seats until they're like, you know, 60 pounds or whatever it is. And, you know, there's much more information out there about car seat safety, and car safety. And so now you would never think to put your little kid in a car without a seatbelt or without a car seat. The same is definitely true for substances. So much has changed, especially with e-cigarettes and cannabis over the past few years. And there's so much more research and information now that it almost doesn't matter what you did when you were their age, because we know so much more information now about the effects of use on that adolescent brain. And what you want for your child is to really help them make good decisions to be, you know, safe and healthy and achieve their goals. And so really kind of switching it over to that mentality and like focusing on what we know now that we didn't know 20, 30, 40 years ago, and how drugs have changed, can kind of help respond to that. I've been asked this many questions. I've responded differently in lots of different situations. And so kind of think about how you might respond in that situation. One of the other things real quick to think about is talking to other parents about this. You know, are your friends' parents, do they send the same message as you? You know, what are their expectations? When you send your kid to their house, do you know that their alcohol is locked up? Do you know that they don't allow underage use? And let your child know that you're talking to their friends' parents, and you're going to follow up if there is a party, and you're going to call to make sure that, you know, there is that supervision and those expectations are the same. A number of years ago, I ended up doing a presentation at someone's house. It was a group of 8th grade boys and their parents. And what I thought was so great about that is all of those boys in that friends group knew that all of the parents were all on the same page, which was really, really great. And the parents were really using that as a supportive measure, you know, because they basically said, if any of you find yourself in any situation, you call any of us. And there were, you know, 12 parents at the ready to support those kids in making good decisions. And so it's so important to talk to other parents. The other question we get is what to do if you suspect your child is using. Here are some examples of questions that you can ask. I'm not going to talk any more on this, but this is an amazing, great resource. It's called the Intervention ebook. It is in all the materials that you guys have. So if you do find yourself in this situation, please use that resource. And then definitely, reach out to myself or another treatment agency if you need more help on this particular area. We could spend an entire hour just talking about this. Here are some video resources. The Talk They Hear You is an app that you can download on your phone that really allows you as a parent to practice these conversations. So just like we did with the scenarios, you're able to practice, which I think is really, really great. And these are all linked in the presentation files for you to access. Here's more resources for you. Just as things come up, or if you want more information about drug-specific things, the NIDA for Teens link, National Institute on Drug Abuse, is really, really great for kind of getting at, what are the risks associated with cannabis use? What are the harmful effects of e-cigarettes? Kind of those substance-specific things. And here are some local treatment agencies if you have further questions on that. So since we are out of time, I'm happy to stay on for another 10, 15 minutes to walk through questions. We will continue recording, but if you do have to jump off, I totally understand. I'm going to put a link to the webinar evaluation in the chat, and that will also be emailed. So I'm not sure if there are questions. If there are, I'm happy to address those now. And if there are no questions, thank you all for attending. It does not look like there's questions. So yes, those of you who are still on, use this webinar as an excuse to talk about this. So someone just asked, where do we find the resources? So the resources are in all the presentation materials. I can put that link again in here, and we also will be sending those out in an email. We definitely want to make sure you guys have those. You can also check out GNCY.org, and we have tons of parent resources there as well. So yeah, we know the questions and the information, the takeaways are so important. So we want to make sure you guys get access to all of those. So yeah, email me. And from GNCY, you can email her as well, or the email that was in the registration, you can also email for following questions. But yes, we want to make sure you guys have everything that you need. So yeah, that is, oh, wait, I think we might have a question. Okay, so there was a question about how to handle the first time a teenager comes home impaired. So I think the absolute first, that first night, if you're awake and they're home, the first thing is obviously their safety, making sure that they're safe and healthy and not potentially experiencing alcohol poisoning or a cannabis overdose or something like that. Also, if they're impaired, you are not going to get anywhere in a conversation. So making sure that they are safe in that immediacy is absolutely important, first and foremost. And then the following day, then it's definitely time for a conversation and sharing what you observe. Saying, oh, I noticed when you came home last night, you smelled like weed, or your eyes were bloodshot, or, your coordination seemed off, and asking those open-ended questions. What happened last night? What was going on? We can go back to the one slide. Well, these might not be necessarily the appropriate questions for in that moment, but really looking at what kind of happened in that situation and what led them to using, talking about how they feel. They could feel awful the next day. So really talk about their experience and what led to that. It's hard because you probably want to yell and scream and freak out. But really talking through what led to it, how they're feeling, what their experience are, share your concerns. I was really worried about when you came home last night because I wasn't sure if you were going to pass out or if your safety and health was at risk and that type of thing. So there was another question about parents using alcohol in front of kids, and now that marijuana is legal for adults, about that. So this is a really, really hard one. There is such a social acceptance, especially surrounding alcohol. And that's why I think if parents choose to use in front of their kids, that you're demonstrating responsible behaviors and demonstrating kind of safety surrounding that, because as adults, we adults make decisions. We have the ability to decide whether we engage in use or not. But making sure that we're, again, demonstrating those responsible, safe behaviors. I think the cannabis thing is like this whole new world, even, for us in the field. It's very interesting. Something that was illegal now is legal, and it's an interesting mind shift. And that's really going to be individual for parents and what their situations are with their kids. And some parents, I think this is more true with marijuana or cannabis, that when they choose to use, they choose not to use in front of their kids, because there is, depending on the method of use for cannabis, if you are smoking or vaping cannabis in front of your kids, then there is secondhand smoke, which can then negatively impact your kids and their health and safety. And so, that is definitely something to consider. But then if there's, edibles or other things, then it's making sure that they are safely stored and can't be accessed by, little kids who might unknowingly try and take it, or etc. So it's very, very tricky. And I wish I had a better answer, but I think the biggest thing, if parents choose to engage in use in front of their kids, it's demonstrating those responsible, safe behaviors as it relates to substance use, and having those conversations with your kids about why it's different for an adult to use than it is for a teen to use. So yeah. So if that is all, I'm going to end the webinar, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. And thank you so much for joining us and participating.